Good evening, everybody. It's office hours time again. Sing out if you can't hear me, sing out if you can't see me. There's a million cables I always have to get ready. I do my work off my dining table. So every office hours, or in fact most days, it's shift everything off, get all the gear ready, and then shift it all back on again. So I always forget something, but hopefully we're recording this and you can hear me and you can chat. You have the ability to chat. In fact, can someone throw something in the chat to make sure you can? But I'm pretty sure that should be working. Let me just make sure I can actually see the window. Or someone's got Q&A already. Fantastic. Okay, good. That means we can chat as well. Awesome. Let me share my screen and we'll get straight into it. Let's have a look here. What do we got? I'm expecting a fairly quiet night tonight, and once we get through the slides, I'll explain why. But so I very much appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll enjoy the next hours. Lots of good things to talk about. Okay, as always, getting in touch is easy. Just scan the QR code. Even the QR code will deal with my ugly mug, or just go to linktree/Connor. That's my Twitter account, so my DMs are always open. Always happy to talk about technology, especially with so many events going on at the moment, and 23C just around the corner. So yeah, lots of things to talk about. For those that are new, as I always say, no need to adjust your set, so to speak. The slide content will always appear either at the left or sort of down toward the bottom, mainly so when we turn this into a YouTube video, it will be effectively my ugly face in the top right-hand corner, and it won't block any of the content, which is always frustrating. As always, I'm a big fan of user groups. I sort of started my Oracle career with the Australian user group, so I always like to throw in a few bits and pieces about what's coming up in the user group and just general face-to-face community. Number one, first thing, hopefully you've had a play with this or at least tried it. SQL Developer, the time-honored free tool we've had for so long as a nice big Java program, still runs just fine, now is available for the #1 development IDE on the planet, which is VS Code, and it's just available as an extension. And it literally is search for SQL Developer in the extensions marketplace, it pops it up, click go, and you are off and running. It's the first release, so we basically put the fundamentals in there, the worksheet, the object browser, but all the stuff that's currently in SQL Developer, the sort of call it classic version, will hopefully be moving its way over time. We've already done an update to this, so that's how easy it is. Literally the extension just says, hey, it's time for an update, and off you go. So SQL Dev extension for VS Code, check it out. If you have problems with it, please ping me or ping Jeff Smith on Twitter. Let us know. We're interested in getting all possible feedback as possible. Cloud World London was last week. Was it last week or this week? Maybe I can't remember now, but just a couple of days ago. It was fantastic. I saw some pictures, just literally dozens and dozens of people there. But speaking of Cloud World, and this is why I'm expecting a fairly quiet group on office hours today, right now we've got Cloud World Milan going on. In fact, I was on Twitter earlier and I saw Dom Giles literally giving a 23C features talk. So Cloud World Milan, if you're in Italy, still time to get along today. So that looks like an absolutely chock-a-block event as well as what's going on today, Apex World, an event I've been to a couple of times. I think both times, I think it was in Rotterdam when I went there. But yeah, so fantastic event, about 300 people normally at the Apex World. Once again, really good, strong Apex community in the Netherlands. So if you're in there in the Netherlands, please jump along. I think it goes for 2 days. So yeah, please get along there and attend that one. And starting today as well, Utah Oracle Users Groups. Same thing. We got a training day going on. So lots of fantastic events literally happening today. And of course, my office hours is competing with them. So yeah, I'm tempted to say, what are you doing here? You should be at these events. But yes, lots of cool stuff going on today. Coming up, just in a couple of weeks' time, another Apex event, Apex Algeria, slightly smaller event, but I'm told I've never been to this one. I'd love to go there. But yeah, really good, strong community feel there. It's a really focus on networking event there. Haven't been, would like to get there one day. Speaking of more Apex stuff, probably one of the biggest Apex conferences that goes around is Apex Connect in Dusseldorf. I've been there, I think, 4 times. I was actually planning to go this year, but unfortunately some circumstances intervened and I couldn't get along there, so I had to withdraw. But that's a bummer. I was due for a keynote, but yeah, so that's going to be a fantastic event. And if you're in anywhere in Germany and you're an Apex person, that is one of the premier events to go to. Niels and his team do a fantastic job running that event. Also, in terms of call for papers, if you're a budding speaker in Romania, we got the Contact 2024. I always feel terrible because I've tried, I think, ever since COVID finished. In fact, it was actually just before COVID started. I was actually I was getting ready to get on a flight to Romania for a Romanian user group event. And literally I got a phone call from Australia saying, if you don't fly back to Australia now, you're not going to make it. So that was my first attempt at getting to Romania. And ever since then, every year I've tried to come up with some reason where I could actually get to the Romania event, but it's always either been budget, timeline, other circumstances. So I'm hoping I can get to a Romania event soon. Mirella does a fantastic job, but yeah, check out the call for papers there. What am I saying? The same thing I say every single month, okay? Support your local user groups. Can't stress enough how important it is to have a strong, healthy community, whether it's meetups, whether it's user groups, whether it's just in your local office where you work. Basically, the more you can get into a sort of a networking kind of mindset, I think the more we all prosper. In fact, I was in India last month for a number of events there, and sort of someone asked me to summarize my thoughts, and I said, none of us is as smart as all of us. And so, yeah, so that's what we want to do, encourage a strong sharing of knowledge. There's a fly in here. So if you see me reach for this, the spray, at some stage the fly is starting to bug me. Anyway, what have we got to talk about tonight? So 7 things, hopefully we'll try to get covered, some technical, some not. So how to move a lob online and the implications of that. Data pumping a single tablespace. Someone was having some problems with that. The number data type, going back to some fundamentals. Someone asked me about the number data type. This one is an interesting one. Is Peel SQL dying? Oh, we got something on the chat. I should keep an eye on the chat, shouldn't I? Oh, you're saying I should visit Romania. Yeah, I know that, Judith. There's no need to rub it in. No need to rub my nose in it. Anyway, what else we got? Is Peel SQL dying? So yeah, someone posted an Ask Tom question and then followed up with the bits and pieces saying, really is, Peel SQL seems to be really niche now. Is it something we really should be worried about? So I'll talk about that. The object dependency mode for the dependency between objects in the database. Something about PDB resource limits not working. And finally, a 23C one that came in about the 23C audit featuring supporting the not exists command, which has been around for a while. So lots of good stuff to talk about. As always, happy to have you sing out on the chat or the Q&A. Question from Rich. Has Oracle ever considered wikiing the Oracle documentation? The documentation gets better and better every release, but there's still things that the community could add to the documentation, provide extra clarity, etc. I agree. I don't think we'll see a wiki style information, but one thing I would like to see is people have been around for as long as I have in the Oracle world. Back in the Oracle 8, sort of 8, 9 documentation timeframe, on every page, there was a feedback button. Now, there's a feedback button there is at the moment, but that feedback button literally is a thumbs up or a thumbs down. In the old days, the feedback button took you to a pop-up which said, this is the page you're currently on. What are your thoughts, positive or negative, but also please provide some commentary. And so if you found bugs in the documentation, things that were missing, things that were confusing, you could do that and it would actually be sent to the people in the documentation team. I know this for a fact because before I joined Oracle, I used to use that facility and I would occasionally get emails back from people in Oracle, various product managers saying, thanks for that. Yes, we've fixed this, we've moved this, we're shuffling it around, etc. So while we're on the topic of documentation, so that's one thing I think is rather than a wiki, I think the concept of the community being able to genuinely provide feedback. At the moment, the plus and minus thing is, I suppose, the modern form of feedback, but I don't like it. I prefer people being able to provide commentary because, I think we all benefit from that. And also Oracle benefits because it's like someone doing, a bit of QA of our documentation for free. I think, everyone wins. The other thing about documentation, my dog's come to join me early in the evening. The other thing about documentation I'd like to see is, I was looking the other day at the alter table command in the PDF. Now, if memory serves, the alter table command, one command, alter table, 282 pages. So that's pretty insane. Like, it's a amazingly powerful command. But what that means is, for someone just going, oh, I need to add a column. It's probably the most common thing I want to do with alter table is add a column. They're going, oh my goodness, 282 pages for this one command. I would like, this is my utopia for the documentation. I would like to see for each command, that are in the common command sets, create table, create index, etc. You could probably find, say, 50 commands that are common. For each one, I would have at the start of that documentation section something that says, okay, here's the most common thing you'll do. You want to create a table? Here's a create table command with a primary key and 5 columns, a string, a number, and a date and a timestamp, for example. Just so anyone saying, oh, look, I'm new to Oracle, I want to see how to create a table, they go to the create table command, and there's an example they can cut and paste. Now, underneath that is all the other hundreds of pages of all the things I want to create: a compressed table or an object table, or all the various permutations and powerful stuff we all offer in Oracle. But at the top of every common command, have a little quick and easy section saying, you want to create an index? Here's how you get up and going. Create a table? Here's how you go. Create a user? Here's the typical grants you'll need, etc. Such that a novice can come in and go, yep, bang, 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 I'm good to go. I think one of the enormous values of people probably know oraclebase.com, Tim Hall's website. I think one of the wonderful things there is it presents that offering. It's a case of, I need to be able to do function X. I don't need to know all the details. I just need to know how to get it up and working. Tim's website has always been probably the #1 website on the internet for that kind of information. It's been fantastic. I'd like to see that style of operation in a header section of each of the Oracle documentation sections for all the common commands. So thanks for asking that, Rich, but hopefully that answers your question, and hopefully, and I'm always happy to take people's thoughts on whether they agree with that or not. Rich says, that sounds great. Will Oracle do it? Well, as you know, Rich, I'm way up here in the Oracle organization. Well, let's make that a bit more realistic. I'm about here. I'm at about the same level as a gerbil and a cabbage in the Oracle organization. So I pass these feedback on, and I will obviously pass yours on as well, but I can't make any promises. Hopefully I'd like to see it. Okay, where was I? That's right, office hours. Yes, so there's our 7 things. Let's chug on to it. I'll say that we've ticked off one already, which is a discussion about the documentation. So the first one I'm going to talk about tonight is PDB resource limits. Here's the question that came in. I saw some parameters to let me limit resource consumption in a PDB, but they do not work. This seems a bad miss by Oracle. And I thought, that's a bit strange. And so my response was, well, we didn't miss. And I went back and forth with this customer a bit more often. And it's interesting, they had actually said to me, yep, we're trying to get this working, and we've seen this stuff about PDB level controls, but they simply don't work. So after a bit of back and forth, we worked out what the problem was, and I thought I'd show you a demo of why they appear not to work sometimes and how to actually see them in action. So let's have a go at that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to a 19C database, which is actually running on a different machine in my home here. So it'll take a little while to connect. But what we're going to do is, this is what the customer was seeing. The parameters they were interested in was one called max IOPS, and there's also one called max megabits per second. 2 parameters to limit the amount of IO resource usage in your database. If you're using something like Exadata, we have a complete component called IO resource control. But for simple systems, you can use these things to limit IOs. But they saw this. They say, oh, you can't set it in memory. And that message seems to suggest, there's often init parameters like this. Maybe it needs to be set at SP file level, and then they bounce the database. So they try that, and they get the same problem. Now, here's the key thing. Even though this person said to me, I've read about these PDB limits, and we've tried them and they don't work. When I asked them to run the following command, show select name from feed all PDBs, they got no rows selected. This is a non-container database, as was theirs. And I fully acknowledge, even though we've been pushing people to move to container databases, there's a huge amount of people out there still running non-container databases. So this is what happens. You can't run those facilities on the non-container databases, the old style databases. You can effectively get the same thing if you're prepared to use the conventional resource manager, the DBMS resource manager package, which sets up, resource plans, consumer groups, etc. But these simple parameters aren't available in a non-container database. So that answers the question for this person as to why they couldn't see it. But let's actually now look at it in action and see what the benefit is. So to do this, I'm going to create a table here called T, and it's just basically 50,000 random rows, but you can see I've set %free equals 99. What that's going to give me is probably 1 row per block, because %free 99 means I can only fit almost the barest minimum of data in every single block. So even though it's only got 50,000 rows, it's going to be about 50,000 blocks. And every time you read a row, you're going to have to read a block. I'm going to put an index on that table on the primary key. And what that means is every time I do a primary key lookup on a random value, it will probably have to read a random block, which means plenty of physical I/O. So let's flush out the buffer cache so nothing's in memory. Let's connect as Scott Tiger and let's do a test. I'm going to run 50,000. I'm not sure why I did 49,999, but 50,000 random IOs. And because I'm using dbms random, every time I do a read, I'm plucking a different random value, and each one of those random values match to a single row on a single block. Therefore, I'm doing it at 50,000 IOs, and it took about 8.7 seconds. Now, let's connect as this again. Let's now throttle it down. So if I did 50,000 IOs in 8.7 seconds, that's what? That's about, somewhere about, 9,000 IOs per second. Excuse my bad maths. So we're going to throttle it down. We're going to say this PDB can only do 2,500 per second. Flush out the buffer cache, and we run the same test. So without any limitation, we could do it in about 8.7 seconds. Normally on this machine, it takes about 5 seconds, but we got Zoom running and we're recording the meeting and all that kind of stuff. But now we can see by throttling it down, we've gone from 8.7, we pushed it out just that little bit to 10 seconds. We've told the database you're not allowed to exceed 2,500 IOs per second. And the question is, why would you want to do this? Why would you want to artificially stop your database from being able to do the work it wants to do? Well, let's look at why this might be an issue. Let me reset the max IOPS back to 0, which means unlimited IOs. That doesn't mean no IOs, that means unlimited IOs. One thing I should stress is in the docs it says, we recommend you never set this to below 100. About 100 IOs per second is what a average running idle database might need, because you've got the control file and checkpoint, all these background processes. So if you set it to below 100, you're getting into that realm where the database itself is going to struggle to do IO. Not such a good thing. So the docs say never go below 100. If you set to 0, it means unlimited. Okay. Judith is saying, I think the error message should show exact reason not available in non-multi-tenant environment. I agree. Judith, I'll pass that on to our error message project. As you know, there's an error message project going on in 23C to make all the error messages better. I'll pass that on and see how we go. In fact, I might not pass that on, because I just realized in 23C, you won't be able to have a non-multi-tenant environment, so that error message will never come up. So maybe in 23C, this problem is solved for reasons maybe not so obvious, but yes. So what I've got now is 2 PDBs. So now I'm going to see why I might want to do this. So I'm getting session 2 ready. So session PDB B, I've got PDB 21A, PDB 21B. PDB 21B is also going to have the exact same setup here, a table called T, %free 99, 50,000 rows with an index on it. I'm going to flush out the buffer cache, and I'm going to connect to Scott Tiger. So this one's ready to run the same benchmark. This is back to session 1. So we get session 1 ready to go. It's going to do the same 40,000. Now I need to go to session 2 and start session 2. And this is why we might want to do some session throttling. Now, you'll have to take some of these numbers with a grain of salt, because this is a local machine running on NVMe. So I probably need to actually have a whole stack of sessions running to really throttle back the performance. But what I've done here is this one, I did 10 times the amount of work to actually really smash my system. And my aim was to slow this down because the database is working so hard. It didn't really slow down. That's the price of having a very fast SSD running in this machine. But please take my word for it. The idea is if I had hundreds of sessions running in PDB 21A, then if they're all smashing away at the IO subsystem, then maybe PDB 21B, which might be a much more important PDB, is getting slowed down its IO because of, we call it the noisy neighbor system. In this case, our session 1 wasn't so noisy. But let's see if we can improve things. So I'll go back to PDB 21A, and I think you're too aggressive. You're hurting PDB 21B. So I'm going to slow you down. You get 1500 IOPS per second only. Flush out the buffer cache, clear the screen. Let's start up session 2. Off we go. And then this one's going to do much less work now. And so session 2, in theory, will run much faster. It was running pretty much at speed anyway, but still we went from 8.7 down to 7.96 because this session over here has been dramatically throttled down to 1500 IOs per second. So whereas before it was doing 50,000 IOs in about 8.7 seconds, you can see now we've clunked it right back down to 18 seconds. So you get the idea of what's going on. And that's just me cleaning up. So hopefully that explains why you might get the appearance that it's not available to you. That's because it doesn't run in non-container environments. It's only available for pluggable databases, which makes sense. And now we get an idea of what the usage is. It's pluggables only, and it's all about making sure that one pluggable doesn't get starved out of resources from another. Now, one thing I want to put here, which is why I put on the slide, it's important to note that this is unlike CPU utilization when it comes to resource management. In Resource Manager, most parts of the Oracle database, if you say limits on CPU, you're only allowed 40% of the CPU allocation. Most of the time, in most resource profiles in the Oracle database, if the machine is quiet and you're in an environment where you're allowed 40% of the CPU and you start smashing the system, you get 100. And people go, something's broken. 40% normally means if the machine is under duress, I'll guarantee this person gets 40% and no more. And similarly, the other people might get 60%. So for CPU management, what normally happens is most of our resource manager profiles, it's if the machine is absolutely tapped out, then we're controlling who gets the percentage of which resources. With max IOPS here and max megabytes per second at the pluggable level, this is different. This is even if there's no one else in the system, if you set your limit to say 200 IOPS, that's all you're going to get. You can think of this as the IO equivalent of the instance caging facility we have in databases as well, which sets an upper limit on CPU. So it's subtly different from the kind of CPU management we have in Resource Manager, which pretty much lets everyone have everything and just make sure that everyone gets an appropriate measure. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Okay, let's fire up my chat window so I don't miss anything. Okay, moving lobs online. Here's the question that came in. When I move just a lob, the indexes on the table still get marked unusable. Why is this the case? Because if I'm only moving the lob, then the lob index and the log segment obviously are being reshuffled, but the table data isn't. We're using online help. And I think the best way I could describe this is with this sort of meme, and there's plenty of memes like this out there on the internet, which is you need to understand the importance of commas. This is a famous meme where someone says, I love cooking my pets and my family. I think what they meant was, I love cooking, comma, my pets, comma, and my family. So the intonation and the pausing is important. And this same sort of mindset is important when we come to running DDL for lobs in the Oracle database. Let me give you a demo to help you explain what that means. So I'm going to create a table called T. It's got a primary key, one other column, and a clob in C. And I'm going to populate it with just 10,000 rows, row num, which is just numbers from 1 to 10,000, and a clob of size 100 bytes. So it's hardly large. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do alter table move lob. I'm just going to move the lob and store it in tablespace users. So I'm just moving the lob here. So I run that, the command got run, and what happened? My index is unusable. So my primary key and my index I created on the X column are both unusable. My lob's fine, but why are my indexes unusable? If I didn't move the data, how come they got moved about? Well, it's really about where the implied comma is in the DDL. Alter table T move lob is actually alter table T move. Move the table. We're moving everything. And this second line is really just a bit of an addenda to say, this is what I would like to do with the lob when you're moving the entire table. So it's just that subtle difference. It's not alter table T move the lob. It's alter table T move, long pause, and then this is what to do with the lob. So alter table move is always moving the entire table, not just the lob, even though the syntax, especially if it's on one line, suggests that you're just doing something with the lob. So that's a very simple explanation as to why this is an issue. And that's why when you do it, your indexes become unusable because you have to move all the data, including the non-lob rows. Now, that's obviously easily fixed. You just rebuild the indexes if you've hit this problem. The question then comes is, well, what if I want to avoid this index maintenance? Well, yes, since 12.2, just about every alter table command now can be done with an online keyword, which is fantastic. So now I'm just alter table move, add the lob clause, and then just whack an online at the end of it, and you'll see my indexes remain valid. I've done numerous office hours talks on this. It's literally hard to find examples where you can't do online operations now in the Oracle database, which is awesome. There are still some there, but in the vast majority of cases, just throw an online keyword at the end and see what happens. It's generally going to work pretty well. So the question is now is to sort of help under our understanding of online, and what you have to be careful of is I want to talk about the definition of online. If I run an online lob move, what are some of the implications of when I start and when it stops? So to do that, I'm going to recreate my table. This time I'll make it a little bit bigger. So this time my clobs are 32K in size, and I got 3,000 of them. So it's going to take a little bit longer now to move this clob because I want to time how long it takes to move it using an online move. So here we go, set timing on. Online moved the table and the lob, and it took about 5.5 seconds. So now we know that in isolation with nothing else going on that table in this database, it takes 5 seconds to move that much data. So now I'm going to actually explore what happens when we have some active transactions going on and I try to do this situation. So let's go over to session 2. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with an active transaction before I even try and move my table. So I've opened up a section, I've deleted one row from the table called T. I'm going to go back here and try alter table move. Now, as we know that in total isolation, right, this takes about 5 seconds, and already you can see it's taken a little bit longer. And in fact, if I sit here and wait, I won't make you wait too long. You can see nothing seems to be happening. So we can assume it's commenced. The question is, how much work has it done? So let's commit this transaction and keep an eye on the other window and see, does it immediately come back, which means it's moved most of the stuff and now it's just waiting for the end of transaction? Or does it take 5 seconds, which means it hasn't really started at all? So we commit that and let's see what happens. We're waiting, we're waiting, we're waiting. And it took about 38 seconds in total, but hopefully you can sort of count roughly there. It took about 5 seconds. It didn't come back instantaneously. So based on that, we can make a reasonable assumption that if there is an open transaction on your table, then the alter table move online will sit and wait. It won't start. It's just waiting for a quiet moment at the start of the operation before it goes ahead. Now, that starts to raise some alarm bells because you're thinking, well, what if this thing is waiting? Will other people wait behind it? Because you don't want to create this big queuing system behind this command waiting to start, because that obviously is the antithesis of what an alter table move online should be. So let's get ready to go. So I need to get ready to flick to session 2. Let's do the opposite now. Let's start this move going, and then as soon as it starts, we'll see, does it block other transactions from occurring? Because if it does, that's not so online. So we're going to already click that going and do that one. And notice here, I'm not blocked from starting a transaction. So even though this is commenced, I'm not blocked from starting other transactions. So that's a relief. We can still run these online operations. It's going to wait for a quiet moment to start, but once it starts, it's not going to stop anyone else doing their day-to-day work on that table. But if it was only going to take 5 seconds, it would have finished by now while I'm talking. So this is the second point we need to know, that while there is an active transaction, this thing can't start, but it also can't finish. So if we now commit, we can now see, did it do most of its work, or has it not even started yet? So if I commit, it's instantaneous. So it did its 5 seconds of work. Now it's just waiting for a quiet moment at the end of things where there's no transactions, and then it completes. So a couple of things to note from those demos. Number one is, alter table move is always an entire table move. There's no such thing as moving just a lob in isolation, even though the command can look like alter table T, move the lob. It's actually move, and this is what to do with the lob. Online is cool because it keeps your indexes valid. And as I said, use online, I think, for almost anywhere where you are worried about input on, impact on other users. And, I think add it online to almost any operation nowadays, and, it should be good. But in this particular case, and there are others as well, online does need a quiet starting moment where there's no transaction activity on the table, and a quiet ending moment where there's no transaction activity on the table. But the good thing is once it's commenced, it's not going to block other people from operations. So it's as we'd expect from an online operation. That's pretty cool. Oh, I should mention, this is my Poland. Probably doesn't come off so well in the picture, does it? Let me spin it around this way. Is that a bit better? That's my Poland Oracle User Group conference glass. It's safely made at home in the suitcase. And so, yeah, it gets used regularly. Oh, Q&A. Okay, anonymous attendee, aren't you brave, says, if it's okay, I have a question about the idle time problem in DBA profiles. Okay, you need to share it. Tell you what, I'll do the number data type, and while that, you can type in what your question is. So I'll mark this one as done, but type in your question, I'll do the number data type, and we'll come back to it. How's that? The number data type. Here's the question that came in. I've inherited a database at a new company, and in the DDL for the database, I assume the scripts, I see a mixture of number 38, integer, numeric, decimal, etc. Do all of these, and I assume the differences between them, have an impact on performance during queries? And the simple answer to that is no. Now that seems a very sort of broad, just nope, not a problem, don't worry about it, etc. So we'll do a demo to actually prove that. But I'll explain why. Once you see the demo, you'll see that it's very easy to justify why you won't see a performance difference. So I'm going to create a table called T, and I've picked a arbitrary selection of some of the cool number data types you can use in an Oracle database. C1's a number, C2 is number 38, which is as big as you can go in terms of integers. C3 is number 10, a smaller integer. C4 is a float. C5 numeric 10, 2. C6 is a decimal. C7 is an int. C8 is a small int. A lot of these are effectively Oracle terms, but also some of these are the ANSI standard terms for numeric data types in the Oracle database. Let's insert the number 177 into every single one of them. Now, there's a command in Oracle called the dump command, which shows you the actual byte representation of these things, and also a command called vsize, which shows you how many bytes they occupy. So let's look at C1 to C4 first. So C1 to C4, C1 is, these are the bytes that are stored, 194 to 78, and the size is 3 bytes. C2, different data type, same data. C3, different data type, same data. C4, same data. If we continue on, C5, same data, same data, same data, same data. All those different data types, when you actually put 177 in there, stored the exact same byte representation. And the reason for that is fairly simple. If you do a describe on that table, even though my DDL was decimal, small int, number, etc., etc., this is how the Oracle database has interpreted it. It said a number is a number, fair enough. Number 38 is number 38. It's effectively a largest integer you can take. Number 10 is a integer limited to the size of 10 digits. Float is actually float 126, which is actually a number with as many digits and as many decimals as possible, but we'll come back to that. Number 10, 2, but look at the ints, small int, etc., decimal, they're just viewed as number 38. Almost with the exception of there's a couple which we'll talk about in a second, almost all the ANSI standard numeric definitions will be mapped to Oracle's own internal number format. And we saw there that we had 197 to something. The byte representation of how Oracle stores a number is perhaps beyond the scope of this office hours session because it would take a fair while, but in simplest terms, we're storing scientific notation versions of every single number, as in the power of 10 and then the decimal component. We do some offsets here and there to make sure we never store all zeros in a byte field from historical reasons, but that's roughly what we're doing. So let's now delete our table and explore a bit further as to what some of the implications might be when we deal with other numbers. So now I'm going to insert 1/7 into all those same values. Let's have a look now what we get. When I query those 8 columns, in a number column, we get an arbitrary number of decimal points. For number 38, it's an integer. The decimals are discarded, so it has to be 0. What was this one? I can't remember. Number 10, 2, I think, was it? or number 10. Number 10, yes, gone. It's an integer. This is a float. We got a number of decimal points. Number 10,2, we only get 2 decimal points. Integer, small int, etc., decimal, all got basically mapped to 0 because they all get mapped to a new number integer format. So no matter what you choose in terms of descriptive, be aware that under the covers, we're generally going back to Oracle's internal data types. But one thing that is important to realize is if you do specify something as just number, you're telling the database, this is the biggest arbitrary precision that you can handle. Number simply means use as many integers as you can, use as many decimal points as you can within the realms of the size of a number data type. The maximum size of a number is 22 bytes. In this case, we actually used 21 to store all this information. So in terms of performance, it's very unlikely that you'll see an impact, but be aware that if you only want to store 5 or 6 decimal places and you just use number, then there's a very good chance that when you store things which are not integers, you're going to get a much larger number of significant digits for things that are repeating fractions, things like a third, a seventh, anything that is not arbitrary, that is not bound in terms of its decimal precision. So that will be 21 bytes instead of a much smaller amount. So be aware of that. Will it hurt you in terms of performance? I'd say not. The reason for that is even if you had a billion of these, if you've gone from 5 bytes to 20 bytes, right, that's for one column in a big long table. If the column has any kind of string data, it's going to be negligible in terms of percentage. In niche cases, maybe you see a significant degradation, but it's going to be very, very rare. Let's now look at column number 2, right? That was different. Notice in this case, because we rounded that down to 0, the length is only 1 byte compared to 21. So if you do have integers, use integer data types to keep them nice and small. Same thing, this was the float. Float came down once again at 20 bytes. C5D was number 10,2. So in this case, we stored just 0.14 and only used a couple of bytes to store that. So the number of digits is typically going to be indicative of the number of significant digits you'll need. Having said all that, there's a couple of niche cases that you need to be aware of. And that is, there's a difference between the float data type, which is just an ANSI standard. We map it to effectively an Oracle type, and float with brackets. So let's have a look. If we insert the values 1.23, 1.23, 1.23 into this table, which is number 5,2, C float and float 5, what pops out? Well, for number 5,2, 5 digits of which 2 can be decimals, we get 1.23, as you'd expect. For a float, which got mapped internally to a number style data type, we get 1.23. For a float 5, we get 1.2. Float with brackets has different precision rules when it comes to the Oracle database. So be aware that would be, that would probably be of concern. You'd be worried about it. You get similar issues when it comes to using binary float and binary double. People are, especially people who are C programmers or have come from, say, Windows environments where things like binary double and double ints, etc., are commonplace, often get, I won't say sucked into, get drawn into using these data types in the Oracle database. But there's a reason Oracle invented its own proprietary number format, and that is to give consistency and precision across all the different platforms, no matter what kind of OS platform or architecture you're using. Let me insert 100.04 into all these three. What do I get for C1? Well, I get 100.04. That's what I expect because that's the value I put in. What do I get for the binary float? I get 100.04 and a little bit extra. That's the inherent nature of floating point numbers when you're using these native data types. But the binary double seems to be okay. Or is it? This is actually just a formatting thing. If I crank out the format to larger, even the binary double, which is meant to be more precise, you get 100.04, and then way down here, you get an extra 1. If you're adding up these or using them for currency or adding up lots of things, then ultimately you're probably going to get yourself into some sort of strife. This is why we generally prefer people just to use the number data types. So as we saw, there are some niche cases here, binary floats, etc., where you do need to take a lot of care if you're storing numeric data. There are some there are use cases for those data types, but be aware of the implications when it comes to precision. To answer the question of whether you should use, let's say I've got a a 9-digit number. Should I use number 38, or maybe number 9? I recommend using number 9 if you're only storing 9-digit numbers. Not for performance, not for space, because if you're just storing integers, a 9-digit number in number 9 will use the same space as you saw as a number 10, as a number 38, even as a number column. It's the significant digits that matters. However, I think of the data types as being effectively unit tests for your data. It's a way of basically ensuring data quality. If I have a number 38 column and I'm always expecting 9 digits, well, when someone's program stuffs up and puts in 25 digits, your database goes, that's fine. Now that might break all sorts of variables in your code when the data gets queried out. It might break reports because they go too wide. There's all sorts of implications downstream because you let bad data in. If you constrain the data types to the data you're expecting, then effectively it's an insurance policy for all the layers up the stack. So that's why I'm not a fan of people who just use number. It's pretty rare. In fact, I actually put number, just the plain number data type with no precision, I think is far bigger than you'll ever need. I don't even sequence numbers or random numbers generally don't need 38 digits. The only exception I think where people should use number is if you're storing a GUID. A GUID can be stored in an Oracle number data type because the number of digits is sufficient for the size of a raw GUID when it's mapped back to a number. That's probably the only time I would recommend using the number data type without some form of precision on it. So hopefully that helps. Okay, let's get back to anonymous attendee. Oh, we've got Q&A. I like this one. Okay, for the benefit of everyone, let me bring it over here. I have a 19C rack database and I have implemented idle time for specific profiles over a year ago, and it's been working perfectly. On the 12th of March, it stopped working. There has been one change on that day. Every time a user logs in our application using forms, we do some checks in a function. Since they are limited with sessions per user equals 3, when they try login for the third time, they cannot because of a GB $view, which creates 2 parallel sessions, and we get sessions per user error. To mitigate this, we created a scheduler program with a scheduler job with our default job scheduler user. As a parameter at the beginning of the function, we send a username as argument number 1, and then we run the scheduler job, which writes the info into a table. The function then continues to read the information from that table. This solved our problem with GB dollars and sessions per user, but the problem now is idle time is not working at all. My goodness. Having said I will answer that, I might need to take that one offline for you, just because I'm aware that we obviously have a number of other people waiting on things. But let me take a note of that. In fact, I will. And yes, Eric, this glass is not meant for water. Rest assured, once the office hours is over, things change. But got to keep a professional face on here. Okay, what do we got? 9:45. Oh, it's too much interaction with the audience. That's a disaster. Okay, is PL SQL dying? Here's the question that came in. Does PL SQL have a future? i.e., does it stand out as a core integral component in modern data engineering or application development stacks? Or is it considered an exception? Let me try that again because I'm misreading the space. Or is it considered an exception use language driven by compliance requirements rather than intrinsic value? Now, full disclosure here, I will happily be accused of bias here because I've written 2 books in PL SQL. So obviously I'm a bit of a PL SQL fanboy here, but hopefully I can temper that enthusiasm with something which I believe is objective. The origins of PL SQL, have been around forever, and that is, there was this time before the internet when we all worked on mainframes, and then this revolution called client server came along, and as we were told, client server was going to rule the world forever. And as a result, we had client server programs. I remember the days of Gupta and Delphi and Oracle Forms, all these things running as client server applications. And they were extremely successful. But when you have a client and you have a server and you have a very thin little wire between them, you have a lot of network latency. Very quickly, the drive came to be able to run processing on close to the data. And PL SQL was hence born, as well as other similar languages. It's funny how you see on the intertubes everywhere people talking about stored procedures or stored programs of any sort on a database server are bad, it's a bad programming model, etc. People should never ever do it. And then over time, all the people that were singing these things saying, oh, it's a really bad idea, all those people in those technology groups are now finding that they're building technological solutions that are like that. For example, even like React programmers, there's now a thing called server-side React. So you can run your code closer to the data. Mind-blowing, isn't that an incredible revelation? When it comes to dealing with data, running the code close to the data is a lot better than running the data over to the code. Who would have thought? Anyway, I digress. PL/SQL was very much about solving these client-server latency issues, and therefore everyone said, oh, well, now that we have the internet and app servers sit in the data center, close to the data servers, surely PL/SQL is now a thing of the past. Now, I disagree with that, but I'm also happy to concede that I think here at Oracle, we did a bad job when it came to PL/SQL. We came up with this philosophy a while ago called SmartDB. And this is one of the slides from the official SmartDB deck, saying that this is how you should architect your applications. You have data, and then you have one code layer, and then a different declaration layer, and then an error handling layer, then an API layer, then a JSON handling layer, then what's this again called? Something based access control, code-based access control layers around that. Then you have a firewall, then you have ORs. We said this is the way you should be writing applications. And what's more is if you weren't doing this, you were a failure. And I attended some webinars, or in those days because of COVID, but also face-to-face sessions where Oracle people stood up and said, if you're not using SmartDB, you are wasting your time. It's just a silly thing to do. And we were critical. We were critical of people who weren't using it, which I thought was just offensive. Similarly, there were other people that were huge fans of SmartDB, and the philosophy behind SmartDB in terms of running code close to the data when it comes to data processing, I'm a huge fan of. And we had people who were like, they've embraced the idea, and maybe they weren't doing just a tiny percent of some of the things in SmartDB. And what happens? There were people out there going, well, you're a failure. If you're not going to go 100%, you're a failure. I hate both those positions, right? Because it's never about religion. And this is the thing that kills me. And the question of PL/SQL dying is something you see about any language on any platform on the internet. People are always saying, is Java dead? Is JavaScript dead? Is this dead? Is that dead? And there's always this religious fervor about it. And people say, I hate religious arguments because religion never solved a tech problem. PL/SQL is just another tool in the toolbox in terms of building applications successfully. And rather than go into a huge full long talk, I actually have a talk about why I think PL/SQL is still a critical part of any successful Oracle application. Rather than that, because that's a 45-minute talk, I'll give you a couple of slides from it, which is just a real customer example. Before I joined Oracle, I worked at a gambling company here in WA, and they were migrating from a mainframe and rebuilding their gambling system. And so why is this a critical system? Well, Australians gamble a lot. On average, about $25 billion a year, which gives you an idea for the amount of transaction rates that go through gambling systems in Australia. So their new system, which was migrating off a mainframe, was a combination of C#, C++, Enterprise Service Bus, and Tuxedo, all managed via WebLogic through services and then talking to the database. And that's what the schematic looked like. But as a result, everything was written in little routines. So every time you wanted, someone comes along, they want to place a bet on, say, a horse race, we'd call these little modular routines. Is that race open for betting? Someone wants to bet, say, a winner, a place bet, or a trifecta, or one of the various bets. Is that type available for this race? Are all the horses on your bet valid? Maybe some of them have been scratched. Are the funds in your account sufficient for the bet you're trying to place? Are there any restrictions on you because some people are not allowed to bet, etc. On and on and on. There's all these things that have to be called before you're allowed to place a bet. Every single one of them was a lovely modular piece of code in either C++ or C# that was controlled with services. So even though the diagram looks like this is a much closer form of reality. To place a bet, you end up calling a myriad of services. Every single service goes between WebLogic to the database, back and forth. Yes, it's all in the same data center, but even small latency times a million is a lot of latency. So they pretty much, that's how I got involved with this organization. They said, we're having some dramas. We're doing thousands of transactions per second and we just can't get the load done. So this is how I discovered they had all these hundreds of APIs, literally, which is great. I mean, this is good modular coding, hundreds of APIs doing all these particular functions, etc. Out of all these hundreds of APIs, what we did was we took two. That is, people wanted to place a bet. And what happens is when a horse race is finished or any sporting event is finished, people come with their ticket and they go, am I a winner? It's like, checking your lottery results. So something like 80% of all activity on this database was someone betting, someone saying, is my bet a winner? Out of all those hundreds of APIs, we took those two and put them into Peel SQL. That's all we did. Now, I'd love to say we refactored the code, etc. We didn't do any of that. If the C# program called Place a Bet did 100 API calls, we simply got those 100 calls, we put them down in Peel SQL, and still did the 100 calls. I'm sure we could have made it far more efficient. Maybe just, batch up some calls, refactor the code. We didn't want to do any of that. We simply said, here's 100 separate SQL statements. Let's run 100 separate SQL statements sitting here in Peel SQL, and when they're all run, we'll send it back. So it wasn't even good refactoring. It was simply relocating code that was dealing with data close to the data. And the best language for that is obviously Peel SQL. Solve the problem. Literally all their performance problems disappeared with that simple change. And that's why, things like Peel SQL are critical, I think, for applications in the Oracle world. And this is my key thing. It's not about the language. I'm not saying that Peel SQL is the best language in the world. I couldn't care less if you ran a C program on the database server or a Node program or anything else, but run the programs in a location and in a model that best suits the requirement. And for dealing with data, you want to run code close to the data. And having said you could run C or JavaScript, whatever, Peel SQL has a unique advantage because it is so tightly bound to the database. The things you can run static SQL, it keeps cursors open, etc. There's all sorts of tweaks and features in Peel SQL that these other environments can never have because they're simply not close enough to the database. I think Philip did a talk last year at Apex Connect saying that he did some testing of JavaScript in the database versus Peel SQL. And while it's great to have JavaScript in the database, Peel SQL ran rings around it in terms of performance because it's that tightly integrated with the data. So Peel SQL, I think, has a huge benefit. But as I said, don't choose Peel SQL just because it's the language. Choose the language you need to use based on performance, security, maintenance, and also the skill set you have in your organization. Use those 4 things to make an educated decision. And generally, I'm going to find Peel SQL becomes a no-brainer when you consider those 4 critical requirements. Oh, it's 9:54. When we get one more done? Maybe one more. Apologies if we run just a couple of minutes over. Tablespace level DataPump. Here's the question that came in. I'm trying to use the tablespace mode of the DataPump API to export out everything in a tablespace, but it's picking up objects that are not in that tablespace. Is this a bug? So the critical part here in this exercise was having a better definition of what an object's tablespace is. And we'll go through the demo and have a look and see why you can actually pick up objects that might not be in the tablespace that you're after. So I'm going to create a user called DP for DataPump. I'll give it DBA, which solves a lot of the issues, and connect as that. Let's create a table. So I'm going to create a table here called T. It's partitioned by list. It's going to sit in 4 table spaces. These are just 4 random table spaces I know exist on this database, and I'm simply put a row into each one. So each one of these partitions here has 1 row in it, but this table sits across 4 table spaces. So as we can see, if we look at just this one, table space large TS, yes, the table is in here, and the partition is P large TS. So if I want to get out just this partition worth of data, I should be able to export this table space. So let's give it a go. I'm just cleaning up my previous files. And this is the DataPump API. If you've never seen this, you can actually run DataPump from Peel SQL. In fact, I should set this running and then we can talk about it. So you can run DataPump from Peel SQL. Don't run it from the command line. And it looks very similar to what you do with the command line, just in PL SQL terms. I'm starting an export, then I'm adding the file in which direction I want to dump the file to. I'm adding a log file. I'm adding a filter here. And here's the filter. I'm saying I'm only using the DP schema, the one we're in, and I'm only interested in the elements that are in the table space called large TS. And as we saw, that was just one of the partitions. So this is finished. It's actually run DataPump in the normal way, created a pump file and a log file. Let's look at the log file. It exported a table called T, but it exported this partition. That's in the Ask Tom table space. It exported the one we want, large TS, but then it exported this table, the segment in this table space. It exported the partition in this table space. That's obviously not what we want. It picked up information from other table spaces. And if this had 1 billion rows in each table space, then obviously that's a massive amount of extra data. So what's going on here? The way partitions work is whenever you nominate a table space says, okay, does any partition for this particular table sit in this table space? Yes, that means I need the table, and it grabs the entire table. That's just the way the DataPump works. It says, okay, you've asked for anything in this table space. It's like get a distinct list of objects in this table space. Oh, T happens to be in here for some of its partitions. That means I need T, the whole lot. The question is, how can you fix this? Well, one of the cool things you can do is this requires a bit of planning in advance, but what you can do is nominate partitions as well when it comes to doing an export. So what you would have to do is, if you have a table which spans multiple table spaces, but you only want to get the partitions in this particular table space, this is all as before, but now I'm actually adding an extra filter saying this is the list of partitions for the table called T that I'm interested in. So we can set that running again. I should have set this running while I was talking. So we're doing the same thing, table space filter, but also we're doing now a partition filter. What this would mean in the real world is if you wanted to get a particular table space, you would need to do a little bit of advanced queries. Find out the list of partitions that are in that table space. Our DataPump's finished, and if we spit it out, we can see we only exported that one partition. And on that note, look at that. 1 minute early. I never finish 1 minute early. That's fantastic. Got to be happy with that. Let's stop the share. So to wrap it up, huge thanks for attending today, because I know there have been so many things that could have grabbed your attention. And don't get me wrong, anyone that's gone to those user group meetings or is attending Cloud World either in person or via the live stream, awesome. You know, the more we involve ourselves in conferences, whether they're virtual, face-to-face, or things like office hours, as I said before, the bigger our community gets, the better our community gets. So as always, thank you for your time. We'll see you again in a month's time with more office hours stuff. 23C continues to draw ever closer. There'll be some very, very interesting announcements about 23C coming up very, very soon. Make a note of that. When you hear the announcement, you'll know what I was talking about, and you can just say, I heard it here first. So keep an eye out for that. And but yeah, until then, we'll see you next month at office hours, and please stay in touch. Bye for now, everybody.